I welcome you to the module 7. So, the module 7 is about emotion. So, this module will talk about the different aspects to emotion, how psychology understand emotions and so on. So, this is the first lecture of this module and overall this is lecture number 17. So, today's lecture is titled as Emotions, Concepts, Categories and Communication. So, we will talk about the concept of emotion, what are the different categories of emotions and how we communicate emotion. So, before we talk about today's lecture, let me give you a brief recap of the last lecture. So, the last lecture was lecture number 16, which was part of the earlier model on thinking and intelligence. So, in the last lecture, we discussed the concept of intelligence testing. What is the meaning of intelligence testing? We discussed some of the most important intelligence tests that are available to us, which includes tests like Binet-Simon standard Binet intelligence test, Wechsler's test and so on. We also discussed the concept of IQ score and the deviation IQ. We also discussed contemporary IQ test for both adults and children. We also discussed the difference between aptitude test and intelligence test. We also discussed what is the validity of this test and what are the possible misuses of these tests. And at the end, we discussed the extremes of intelligence, like people who are very low on the IQ score and people who are very high on the IQ scores. In the population, what is the patterns of distribution of them and so on. So, these were the things that we discussed in the last lecture. In today's lecture, we will talk about the concept of emotion. So, we will define what is the meaning of emotion. We will look into what are the different components of emotion. We will also discuss the difference between the concept of affect, emotions and moods. What is the technical difference between these terms that we use. We will also look at the classification of emotion in terms of basic emotions. We will look into the basic emotional model. We will also discuss the classification of emotion based on the dimensional model of emotions. And at the end, we will discuss the communication of emotion. How do we communicate emotion? So, let us start today's lecture. So, when we discuss the concept of emotion, it is one of the most central idea in the field of psychology. So, in psychology, every subdisciplines or every areas of psychology or subdisciplines of psychology revolves around the concept of emotion. We cannot separate emotion from the study of psychology. From the scientific standpoint, it is one of the central aspect in the field of psychology. For example, clinical psychologists, which is one branch of psychology, often want to help people control their harmful and dysfunctional emotion. Clinical psychologists, for emotion is the central aspect because it looks into the psychological disorder, and most of these disorders have emotional issues, and they try to help people come out of their harmful emotions and dysfunctional emotions and so on. If you look at cognitive psychologists, they consider how emotion influence people's thoughts, decision making and so on, how emotion influences our thoughts and thoughts on the other hand influence our emotions and so on, how it influences our decision making and so on. Social psychologists, for example, or personality psychologists consider how emotion impact our relationship with other people and so on. So, these are like some of the broad branches of psychology. If you see, emotion is very much ingrained in the study of any branch of psychology. Emotion will come into the picture. So, this is very central idea. So, we need to understand emotion to understand a lot of psychological aspects that we discussed in the field of psychology. So, the most important question is then how do we define emotion? We all feel emotions on a daily basis, such as we feel angry, we feel happy, we feel sad and so on. These are like on a daily basis emotions, diverse emotion we experience. We all experience emotions, but in that sense we all know what is emotion, but it is very difficult to actually define it. What is the meaning of emotions? We all feel it, but it is not easy to define it. So, it is easy to recognize an emotion, but it is difficult to define it. In fact, one of the published research reviews about 92 separate definitions of emotions. Somewhere in 1981, at that time, they could kind of collect about 92 definitions of emotion. This shows the varied way people have been defining it. This led to some researchers to state that everyone knows what it is until they are asked to define it. We all know what is emotion until we are asked to define it. When we are asked to define it, we find difficult to define it. So, the Latin source of word emotion is actually emotio, which comes from the verb emovere, meaning to move or to stir up. Emotion, so it's the root word is, the meaning of root word of emotion is to move or to stir up. So, emotion is something that moves you, it stirs you up. Aristotle also said emotions as a principle of movement in human experience. So, it is a principle of movement. Human beings move because of emotions. So, it is a principle of movement. So, despite it is very difficult to define what is emotion, some psychologists try to give some specific criteria to define or try to define it in some objective way. One of such definition is emotion is a motivated state that is marked by physiological arousal, expressive behavior and mental experience, and that varies in its intensity and pleasantness or unpleasantness. So, how emotion is defined in this context here? Emotion, it is a motivated state. Whenever we feel emotion, there is a sense of motivation to do something, there is some kind of action tendencies. And for every emotional experience, there are three important things that happens. One is there will be physiological arousal, means there will be some bodily changes, there will be some physiological arousal happening, like your heartbeat will increase, okay? Maybe you will start sweating or some kind of impact on the body or in terms of certain expression in the body, physiological arousal, mostly you get activated and so on. Then, so this is one thing. Second is expressive behavior. Whenever we experience any emotion, we also express it through our body, face and so on. The third one is there is a mental experience also. So, every emotion we experience certain mental state. Whenever you feel happy, so there is a joyful state. Whenever you feel sad, there is a different kind of mental state which is unpleasant. So, all these mental states differ in intensity. Some emotions are very intense, strong, some are less intense, and also they differ in pleasantness and unpleasantness. Some emotions are pleasant, you feel good about it, like when you experience happiness or joy. Some emotions are unpleasant, like anger and so on, we do not feel good about it. So, this is one of the like you can say it is a kind of comprehensive definition that kind of takes care of lot of aspects involved in the emotions. So, let us take an example of, let us say you are angry. So, let us define this anger from this definition perspective. When you are angry, what happens? What is the physiological arousal here? Your heartbeat increases. So, that is the physiological arousal part. We might show specific facial expression such as gritting of teeth. When people become angry, they start gritting of their teeth, So, that is an expression part of it. Anybody can understand that this person is angry. So, this is expressive behavior, and whenever we feel angry, we might feel enraged in our mind. So, the very hotness in the mind, enraged. So, that is the mental experience part of it. So, this is one emotions, it is expressing through physiological arousal, expressing behavior, and there is a mental state. Typically, in this case, we experience unpleasant emotion. So, generally this is unpleasant, and in terms of intensity, anger could be highly intense, high intense, depending on your level of anger. Okay? Typically, anger is high intense emotion, intensity is very high. So, when we define any emotion, psychology generally look into all these three aspects. Okay? So, typically we can say, whenever we look at emotion, so there are three aspects to it: physiological arousal, there is an expressive behavior, and there is a mental experience. So, these three will generally come together in every emotions. Now, let us look into these three terms, which are most of the time people use them synonymously, or people do not understand the difference between them. So, in psychology, when we use these terms, they are very their connotations are very different. So, one is called affect, another is called emotions, and third one is moods. They are not same. When you use the word affect, it is a general term that encompasses a wide variety of emotions that people feel. It is the umbrella term that covers both emotions and mood. So, affect is the most broader term, which encompasses all kinds of emotions that we experience and feel, including mood and emotions. So, it's the broadest term is affect. It will include mood, emotions, everything. What is emotion? These are intense feeling directed at a person or an object. Whenever towards an object or a person, you have a certain kind of feeling, we typically call it as an emotion. What are moods? Moods are feeling that are frequently or generally they lack a contextual stimulus that are typically less intense than emotions. Moods are less intense and they are generally context free, means you may feel bad mood for no reason. You do not know why you are feeling bad mood, or your mood is bad, you may not actually know the reasons for it. So, they are in that context, they are generally said they lack contextual stimulus, and the intensity of mood is generally less. So, when you feel bad mood, you may not be very intense, but there will be some background sadness or low mood in you, but emotions are more intense, and generally there is a context, you know why you feel certain emotions. Somebody said something, you feel emotion. So, it is always in the context of some person, some object and so on. So, these three terms are we need to distinguish them because technically they are different. Most experts believe that emotions are more transitory than moods. Emotions are transitory. You do not feel emotion for a long time. So, whenever somebody says you may feel very bad, but it may be let us say for half an hour or something, then you may not have that emotions. But moods are long term. You may feel bad mood for a whole day without even maybe knowing what is the reason for it. So, generally emotions are more transitory than the moods. Moods may linger around for longer time. For example, as we said, the intense feeling of anger may come and go very quickly, sometimes in seconds and minutes, but our bad mood can last hours and days. So, that is another difference in terms of the time period, in the length of the time period for which we experience them. Again, the emotions are responses to person and event. Generally, we respond emotions. So, there is an emotional response to certain context. The context may be a person, may be an object or a situation. So, something happens and then we feel emotions. So, there is a context to emotions, such as being happy to see a buddy at work. So, you see someone doing something and you feel happy. So, the context is that someone person. So, that is the emotions are mostly there is a context to it. In contrast, mood are not typically focused on a certain person or circumstances. Mood may not be connected to some, not necessarily connected to some person or context or situation. Sometimes we just feel bad mood and it may linger for longer time. Then emotions are generally more action oriented. So, whenever we experience emotions, there is a tendency or action tendencies. People immediately try to do some actions. So, when you feel angry, maybe you will go and try to do some actions against the person, maybe you start slapping that person, some kind of action tendencies. Or whenever you feel fear or afraid, you will try to run away. So, these are action tendencies. So, certain emotions create action tendencies, you tend to go in certain directions. While moods are generally more cognitive, we may not behave or do some actions in the context of mood. Okay. It may lead us to think and brood and certain, it may influence our thinking process, but not much to our actions and so on. So, these are some of the difference. So, emotions are caused by a specific event, moods are cause is often general and unclear, emotions are very brief in duration, moods can last longer than emotions. Emotions are specific and numerous in numbers such as anger, fear, sadness, happiness, disgust and so on. On the other hand, moods are more general in dimension. Either you feel positive mood or negative mood. Mostly these are the categories. They may not be very specific. In case of emotions, generally accompanied by distinct facial expression. For every emotion, we have certain expression in the face that very clearly other can also understand that this person is happy or sad and so on. Generally not accompanied by distinct facial expression in the context of mood. Emotions are action oriented in nature. So, as we already said, whenever we feel emotion, there are certain action tendencies. You feel afraid or fear, you tend to run away. So, like this. Moods generally it is more on cognitive in nature. It may influence your thinking process in a certain directions, but not much to our actions. Again, in real life context, they are not always isolated. One influence the other. One can influence the other. Emotion can change into moods, and moods into emotion, and so on. So, when you stop paying attention to the circumstances or the things that triggered an emotion, then emotion can become a mood. Additionally, your emotional response to an incident might be affected by your mood also, whether it is positive or unpleasant. So, in real life, they are always interconnected with each other. Emotions can become mood. For example, you become angry, so that is an emotion. After some time, you do not focus on the specific cause, but this anger emotion will create a bad mood for the rest of your day. So, emotion is changing into mood. Okay. So, your emotional response can also be affected by mood. So, if you are in a bad mood, you are more likely to feel anger, for example. You are already in a bad mood. Some little bit things can trigger bad, negative emotions such as anger and so on. So, mood can influence your emotions. So, like this, in the real life, they are always influencing each other. So, they mutually influence each other. So, this is what it is described here. So, although affect, emotion and moods can be distinguished from one another technically in the concept and theory, this is not always the case in the practice. In the real life context, many times it is not easy to actually distinguish them, because each can influence other, and in real life everything can be mixed up. So, not very easy to actually separate in the practical context. But technically they are different. So, affect is the broadest term. So, under affect, so you have an affect which is the broadest term. Affect includes both emotion and mood. So, that is how we distinguish it. Now, let us look into the classification of emotion. How do we classify different emotion? One particular model that looks into the how do we classify emotion or look at emotion as whether they are basic or not basic emotions. So, this is called as basic emotional model. So, that means we experience diverse emotions in our life, so different types of emotions: anger, contempt, enthusiasm, envy, fear, frustration, disappointment, embarrassment, disgust, happiness, hate, hope, jealousy, so on. Diverse emotion we experience in our life. In contemporary research, psychologists have tried to identify which emotion among them are more basic. Are all these emotions same, or are there certain emotions which are more basic and fundamental? Like they are basic and other emotions are like mix up of this, and then more complex emotion arises. However, researchers disagree on which emotion should be considered as basic. So, there are some disagreement on that, but there are certain theories that talks about certain number of emotions are basic. Psychologists like Paul Ekman, who is one of the most prominent researcher in the field of emotion, Sylvan Tompkins, Carol Izzard and others have proposed theories about biological underpinning of emotion from an evolutionary theory perspective. They agreed that a limited number of emotion exists which they referred as basic emotions. Some of these theories like Paul Ekman, Sylvan Tompkins, Carol Izzard, they propose theories of basic emotion. They said certain number of emotion are basic, like they are more fundamental, universal, and from them other emotion, combination of them can create other emotions. So, these theories are called basic emotional model. Researcher proposed that how do we classify some emotion as basic and some emotion as not basic emotion. What is the criteria for that? Some of the criteria are there should be universal expression which should be involve more than just face, universally expressed across culture. So, everybody experiences this emotion through not just face, through the voice and the body and so on. So, expression is universal. Second is there are discrete physiology, means every basic emotion will impact your body in certain way. There should be discrete identifiable physiological context. What happens in the body when this emotion, like when you feel anger, what happens in the body? When you feel happy, what happens to your body? So, discrete physiological markers will be there. Third, presence in other primates. Lot of these basic emotions will be also experienced by some of the primates, like other animals, evolved animals like chimpanzees or those kind of animals. Another criteria is there should be automatically appraisal evaluation of the environment. So, there has to be certain, these emotions are resultant of certain evaluation of the environment. How do you evaluate an environment? So, when you evaluate an environment as dangerous, you experience fear. So, that is what the meaning of appraisal. So, these are some of the criteria that they said to call an emotion as basic if they fulfill this criteria. So, therefore, this above criteria points out that only those emotions that can be distinguished by a bodily and facial response, have a distinctive signature in the body physiology, exist in the non-human primates and entails a predictable assessment of the environment can be called as a basic emotion. So, these are the criteria to call some emotion as a basic emotion. Now, so there is not yet a consensus on actual numbers of this basic emotion or which specific emotion should be called as basic emotion. However, theories like Paul Ekman consider 6 emotions as basic and kind of largely agreed by a lot of researchers, but still there is not a 100% consensus on that. He said these 6 emotions are basic emotions. One is fear. What is fear? Fear arises with the threat or harm, either physical, emotional, psychological or real or imagined. Whenever we experience or judge a situation as threatening or harmful, fear arises. It could be physical threat, emotional threat, psychological threat, real threat, or you just imagine this is a threat. Then fear arises. So, fear is a very basic emotions. Even other animals experiences that, and it is an universal emotion. So, fear is a basic emotion. Second is called disgust. It arises as a feeling of aversion towards something or offensive. Whenever we feel something, you do not like something. Let us say some objects which smell very bad. So, you feel disgust, some kind of aversion, feeling of aversion towards something which is offensive, you do not like it and so on. So, that is called disgust. So, according to this model, this is also a very universal emotion or the basic emotion. Third one is anger. It arises when we are blocked from pursuing goals or threatened unfairly. Anger arises whenever obviously we are not able to reach a goal, some target and there is some blockage, you feel angry, or whenever you treated unfairly by people, so then you experience anger. Again, it is very universal emotion. Then next comes surprise. It arises when we encounter sudden and unexpected sounds or movement. So, surprise, whenever we experience something sudden, you are not expecting something and suddenly something happens. So, that is the feeling called as surprise. This is also, according to this model, is an basic emotion or fundamental emotion. Then comes joy or enjoyment, which is connected to concept of happiness. It typically arises from connection or sensory pleasure. It can arises from any pleasurable experiences. Then comes sadness. It results from loss of someone or something important. So, sadness is related to some loss of, it may be someone or something important that you have, some kind of loss. So, that is called sadness. So, these are 6 emotions according to Ekman are basic emotions. Like they are very fundamental, very discrete, universal, and every emotion have a very specific markers in the body and so on, facial expression also very different. Paul Ekman later added 7th emotion in his list, and that emotion is called as contempt. So, it is the feeling of dislike for or superiority. Contempt happens when you feel dislike for something or when you feel morally superior, over another person, group or other their actions. Contempt, this is an you feel contempt for other people who are less superior for example, feeling of dislike or superiority, you feel morally superior you are over other person, groups, people, actions and so on. Sense of contempt arises. So, Ekman included this later, and he also said this is also a kind of basic emotion. Now, all these emotions have distinct facial expressions, universal and distinctive patterns of autonomic nervous system activity. So, that is why Ekman said they are basic emotions. However, there are some other theories also listed, some other list in the list of basic emotions. Other researcher like also listed basic emotions such as Sylvan Tompkins proposed a theory of 9 basic emotions, that means he added few more. Carol Izzard said 10 basic emotions, means he added one more, and Robert Plutchik said 8 basic emotions. So, by and large numbers are same, 1 plus minus here and there, but generally these 6 and 7 basic emotions are considered till now. Most of the people agree on those emotions. So, the list of basic emotion is evolving, maybe more will come later based on the research, maybe added later on and so on. So, there is no exact consensus, but somewhere around 6-7 emotions are considered very basic emotions. So, what is the limitation of this theory? So, that is one of the obvious limitation is like still there is not a very concrete consensus on it. Most of the people subscribe or researcher or psychologists subscribe to this theory of basic emotions and consider basic emotion as universal, innate and hardware. However, this theory of basic emotion has yielded significant advances in understanding emotions. Many research, however, have been contesting the idea of basic emotion. Some of the problems are like there is no consensus over which emotion should be included. Still there is the list is different for different researcher. The list of basic emotions keeps changing with the newer research. So, that is the basic problem with this theory. Although kind of 6-7 most of the people agrees on that, but still some theories add few more and some other theories exclude some emotions which were included in other theories and so on. So, those kind of disagreements are there. Research also demonstrated that people do not perceive or identify emotion as distinct standalone entities in many real life contexts, like they don't people all the time do not consider emotions as a very standalone, specific and different entities. Many times people experience them as an ambiguous overlapping experience. A lot of these emotions can kind of intermingle with each other without distinct border among them. Just like a color spectrum, it is difficult to say where this violet ends and where the another color starts if you see those color spectrum and so on. So, a lot of people also consider emotions, it is difficult to find the boundaries and distinctness of them. So, that is also another argument where to what extent it is wise to kind of very distinctively say these are basic emotions. Anyway, these are some of the limitations, but this model is still it's a very accepted model of basic emotions. However, which emotions are basic, obviously that list may be different, but the idea of basic emotion is still very prominent. However, to rectify or address some of the limitations of this basic emotional model, dimensional model of emotion also emerged. So, let us look into what is the meaning of dimensional model of emotions. It tries to address some of the limitation of the basic emotional model. Now, we can also classify emotions based on the dimensional model of emotion. One way is consider the basic emotions and other emotions which are not basic emotion, like more complex emotions. Another way of classifying emotion is that you look at the dimensions of emotions rather than very specific concrete emotions. So, the dimensional view of emotion claims that all emotions are characterized by 2 or even 3 dimensions. Like we look at dimensions of the different emotions. The dimensions include some measures of valence of pleasantness and some measures of intensity or arousal. So, we will look into this, what are those dimensions. One of the models under this dimensional model which is very popular is called circumplex model of emotions. It is a very dominant model within the dimensional model. So, this model, let us look into this model. This is called circumplex model. The circumplex model of emotion was developed by James Russell in 1980. It says that there are 2 basic neurophysiological systems that underlie all emotional state, all affective state. There are 2 dimensions. One is called as valence. Balance means what is the balance of the emotion? Is it a pleasant or unpleasant? Pleasantness or unpleasantness? So, that is the meaning of balance. What is the balance of an emotion? Is it a pleasant emotion or is it an unpleasant emotion? So, that is the one dimension, balance. So, emotion differ in their pleasantness and unpleasantness. Another dimension is called arousal or alertness. Is it highly activated kind of emotions, like it keeps you very aroused and active, or it makes you lethargic? So, that is another dimension, arousal or alertness. Okay. So, these 2 dimensions, emotions can be categorized under this balance part and arousal part. So, this model looks into emotions in these 2 dimensions. Now, these 2 dimensions are considered as bipolar and orthogonal. What is the meaning of this is that they are independent dimensions. So, balance and activations are completely different from each other, like these are independent dimensions. One may have high pleasantness, unpleasantness of an emotion, it may not have any direct connection with the in terms of arousal part of it. So, these are orthogonal independent dimension. So, this is just a depiction of some of the emotions that were shown using this balance and arousal dimension. So, one dimension is this part, pleasant, unpleasant. Some emotions are unpleasant, some emotions are pleasant. So, this is the balance dimension. Okay. So, this is balance. This one, this vertical line is arousal dimension. So, this is arousal. So, arousal in terms of activation, highly aroused, it makes you highly alert, and deactivation, it makes you lethargic, low energy. So, emotions. So, these are 2 orthogonal dimensions, these are orthogonal, very independent dimension. So, based on these 2 dimensions, there can be multiple emotions which come in all these combinations of pleasant, unpleasant, activation, deactivation. So, if you see here, this is one area, this is another area. So, there are 4, you can say 4 sectors here. Each of this sector looks into a particular this combination of these 2 dimensions. If you see this area, this sector is what? Unpleasant and activation. So, there is an unpleasant, but these emotions are highly active. Okay? This sector shows emotions are highly active, but these are pleasant, very pleasant emotions. These emotions are deactivated, but pleasant emotions, low energy but pleasant. These emotions are unpleasant but low energy, and within them also there is a differences. So, the more we go from here to here, the unpleasantness increases, and so there can be some kind of differences within them also. So, based on that, there can be emotions in different kind of can be placed in any of these sectors based on their balance and activation. So, according to Russell, this balance and activations are independent bipolar dimension, as we have shown. Balance and activations are unrelated to each other, hence they are independent dimensions. Bipolar means opposite emotional terms reflect each of the balance and activation. So, there will be opposite, as we said, pleasant, unpleasant, activation, deactivation, opposite, bipolar. A division of the circumplex space into quadrants, this 4 quadrant, as we said, produces meaningful variants of different affective experiences. So, first is high activation, pleasant effect, high activation, unpleasant effect, low activation, unpleasant effect. So, if you see here, so this is high activation, unpleasant. What are the examples? Like if you see fear, anger, disgust, stressed, these are the emotions that we experience. These are highly activated. You feel lot of energy, but unpleasant also. You don't feel good about them. When you feel anger, disgust, fear, these are lots of energy involved in it, but you feel very unpleasant also. So, that is one quadrant called high activation, unpleasant. If you see here, it is deactivation, means low activation, unpleasant. These are also unpleasant, but then energy is very low, like sadness, depressed, lethargic, fatigue. These are different expression of those emotions which are low energy, but again you feel unpleasant about them. Then comes here low activation, pleasant. These are pleasant, but energy is very low, like you feel content, serene, relaxed, calm. These are the emotions. The last one is high activation, high activation but pleasant. These are pleasant, but a lot of energy involved in it, like happy, elated, excited, alert, and so on. So, based on these 2 dimensions, we can categorize any emotion based on their nature in any of these 4 quadrants. So, these 4 we have already discussed. So, a linear combination of these 2 dimensions on the varying level of both balance and arousal can be used to conceptualize any emotions. We can put any emotions in using these 4 quadrants. So, feeling of joy is conceptualized as a result of strong activation and positive balance, as we discussed all these examples. So, we can put any emotions based on those quadrants. The cognitive interpretation of the neurophysiological experiences of arousal and balance within this situation context is contributing factor to categorization of our subjective experiences. So, this is the main conceptualization of this model. Rather than talking about discrete some basic emotions and so on, they are putting or trying to classify emotion based on pleasantness, unpleasantness, or one dimension, balance, on activation and deactivation or arousal level, low or high, Based on those dimensions, this model is trying to classify emotions. The similarity between any two effects is also assumed to depend on how far apart. The more closer they are in that whole model, the more similar they are. As the distance between emotions increases in the model, their nature, their differences or dissimilarities also increase. So, that is how you can put it in the different quadrants. When affective states are farther apart from one another, the positive correlation between them should decrease. They will become different. So, that is the meaning of positive correlation decreasing. Affective states should exhibit increasing negative association with one another as separation get closer to 180. If two emotions are 180 degree opposite, means they should be completely different from each other. So, that basically they will be in the opposite spectrum. For example, if you see here, this is sadness, this extreme 180 degree opposite, here happiness. They are very different, completely opposite to each other. So, this is how we can also find out the nature of those emotions based on their positioning in this whole quadrant system. Now, this model also has some limitations. No model is perfect. However, this two-dimensional represent frequently does not convey significant distinctions among these emotions. It only says about balance and activation, but a lot of emotion has many other characteristics which is not able to capture by this model. For instance, although being positions in the same area of the circle and having similar negative high arousal emotions, fear and anger, for example, both are put almost in the same place, very near to each other, but in terms of experience they are very different from one another. These both are high arousal, unpleasant emotions, same quadrant, but in real life experience they are very different emotions. Their action tendencies are very different. Whenever we feel fear, we want to run away from the situation. Whenever we feel anger, we want to move towards and let us say engage and fight with that situation. So, in terms of experiences, in terms of action tendencies, they are very different, but in context of circumplex model or dimensional model, they are in the same category. So, those finer distinctions, they are not able to, this model is not able to capture that. This model was also developed based on selection of emotion that was not supported by systematic sampling. They are just based on this quadrant, they just put emotions, not very heavily supported by systematic sampling or theoretical principles. So, there is not much theoretical principles behind where to put a emotion and so on. These are just based on the balance and activation. The model has gained widespread acceptance as a meaningful depiction of effect despite this limitation, but obviously this model has a lot of applications also in different contexts to understand if you want to place emotions from the dimensional context. But obviously every model has their limitations, no model is perfect. Now, let us look at the end, how do we communicate emotions? Whenever we see emotions are like one of the important aspect of emotion is that these are communicated. Whenever I experience an emotions, there is a sense of other people understand that what kind of emotions one is experiencing. Then people respond accordingly. So, the communication of emotion is very important, and there are different ways through which we communicate emotions. So, communication of emotion is central in our social life. If you look at our social life, it is the major part of it is how do we pick emotions from others, how do we express emotions, how others understand our emotions. That is one of the important aspect of social life. People express emotions within facial actions, through face, with their voice, with their touch, with the posture, with their gait or movement and so on. Everything expresses your emotions. We express emotion through face, through the body, through our voice, through the touch, through the movement, walking movement, whatever it is. Everything can communicate emotions. What is their state of mind? Obviously, we cannot discuss every aspect of it because it is beyond the scope to discuss every aspect of communication of emotion. In this here, we will talk about two major aspects of communication of emotion. One is through non-verbal aspect of it, without even speaking how emotions are communicated, and then through face. This is the major portal for expression of emotion. Through face we express emotions. So, there are many other aspects to it, but we will focus on these two parts. One is non-verbal communication and another is facial expression of emotions. So, let us look at the first, non-verbal communication of emotion. Non-verbal means without saying anything, your body language expresses emotions. So, each emotional expression can connote diverse meanings and refer to many classes of non-verbal communication. For example, a smile may mean many things. When you smile, it may mean many things depending on the context. Okay. A smile may mean expressing politeness. Sometimes we smile to hide feelings of disapproval. Sometimes we smile to express romantic attraction. Sometimes we smile to signal weakness. Sometimes to pretend that we are following what another person is saying, and so on. Same non-verbal expression or a smile, but it may mean lot of things depending on the context. Therefore, one expression may mean many things depending on the non-verbal behavior associated with it. What kind of non-verbal behavior you show with the smile, that will determine what is the meaning of your smile. So, that is why non-verbal movements of hand and so on, all these things give meaning to the emotions and so on. So, this non-verbal communication of emotion plays very important role. So, there are 5 categories of non-verbal behavior in the context of emotional expression communication. Paul Ekman and Friesen, they organize non-verbal behavior into 5 categories. Non-verbal means through our body language we express them. One is called emblems. Emblems means what? It's a non-verbal gesture that directly translate into words. So, they are intentional bodily gestures that can be quickly and easily translated into words, such as wave for come here, thumbs up for okay, and so on. So, these are like certain expression through our body which can directly be translated into certain emotions or certain words. Let us say when we say, when we show let us say thumbs up, so that means it is okay, automatically we understand that. So, this is a non-verbal expression which can directly be translated into words. Okay. So, these are intentional certain gesture that we show, which can easily be, one can understand them, and these may be culturally defined. So, same gesture may mean different thing in different cultures. So, this thumbs up may mean one thing for one culture and it may mean little different things from different culture also, depending on how people use it. Okay. So, these are called emblems. These are gestures by which can be translated into specific words, and the person will understand what is the meaning of this. You show thumbs up, we show like this, we show all kinds of things. So, people understand. So, these are accompanied with our whatever we say, express emotions, and they add emphasis to that and so on. Second is called illustrator. Illustrator means what? These are non-verbal gestures that accompanies our speech to make it vivid and visual and empathic. Now, these are not directly translated into words. So, for example, when you show thumbs up, it means okay. So, you can directly translate it into a word, okay. In Illustrator, they are not directly translated into specific words, but these are always accompanied certain speech. When you say something, with that you show certain gesture and it adds emphasis to your words. So, they are just clarifies your communication process, add emphasis to your communication using certain gestures. So, these are called illustrators. Illustrator, they have no meaning on their own. On the other hand, emblems that we discussed, they have the meaning. So, if I say thumbs up, it means okay, so it has its own meaning. Illustrator may on their own, they may not have any meaning, but when they are accompanied with speech, they have meaning. They only make sense along with the speech or word. For example, when we give someone directions, you show go in this direction. So, you are saying something and also adding a gesture, go, but you show indicate a direction, go in this direction. So, it add emphasis, it gives direction properly. But without saying go and just showing this, probably it may not have much meaning to it. No? Only when you say go means you should go in this direction. But if you just show this direction without saying whatever you want to say, the person may not understand. So, these are always accompanied with the speech. These are called illustrators. Then comes regulators. These are non-verbal behavior that we use to coordinate or regulate conversation or interaction. These are like, when we are conversing with another person, we use certain non-verbal gestures to regulate the conversation that we have. For example, you nod your head while someone is speaking and the person understands that you are understanding and you are engaged with that person. You are understanding the whatever the other person is saying. So, you nod your head. So, these are regulators. It keeps the conversation meaningful and continue the conversation. And in a speech you may just show and say wait and stop. So, other person understand you should stop speaking. So, these are called regulators. Then comes self-adapters. Self-adapters are nervous activities that appears to have no apparent goal other than to release nervous energy. Whenever we feel nervous or there is some kind of emotions which are like anxiety and stress, we express through our body language. So, these expressions are called as self-adapters. These are mostly unconscious, you may not be even aware that you are doing that. So, you do something with your body and which are triggered by stress and anxiety or boredom or discomfort. Let us say people scratch their chins, itch their faces, target their hair, bounce their legs, bite their lips, all these kinds of small actions that are through which your anxiety, nervousness, boredom can get expressed. These are mostly person may not be even conscious that they are doing it. So, these are called self-adapters. They also shows your state of emotion. The last one is obviously display of emotion, which is a broad idea. We display emotion through face, body, voice, touch and so on. So, this is one of, and in the display of emotion, the most important component through which we display our emotion is through faces. So, I will talk about only face part. Obviously, we also express emotion through voice, through body movement and so on, but I will not be able to discuss all the things. So, I will just talk about briefly touch upon how we express emotion through face. So, facial expression of emotion is the one of the most dominant mode of expression of emotion. It is the most crucial human communication is through facial expression. Face is the charge of conveying our ideas and emotions. People understand most of the things, our mental state by looking at our face. Faces are possibly the most essential and eye-catching object that people see. Whenever people see another person, they only see at your face only most of the time and they understand your mental state. Until a newborn develops language comprehension, her caregivers' non-verbal behavior, particularly their facial expression, is the main mode of communication even an infant catches from the face of the mother or whoever is the caretaker. So, facial expression is the most dominant mode of expression of emotion. Face and facial expression continue to be important even after we learn to communicate verbally. Obviously, many times we are able to communicate our emotions through words that I am feeling sad, I am feeling happy. Still, facial expression is always accompanied by that. Face attracts our attention more than any other stimuli or any other part of the body. So, it is adaptive for human to pay attention to faces since others around us facial expression reveal information about the emotion. This is very important that because face reveals all the information about our emotion, our state of mind, and it is adaptive. We can understand others from their facial expression. If you see in today's world, there is a growing usage of emojis. What are emojis? These are animated faces only. We can express all kinds of emotion through emojis in our messaging and text conversation. Everybody are using emojis. Most of these emojis are face only. Through simple face, not even very complex face, just eyes and lips. These emojis are able to express diverse emotions. and people are using them. So, this shows the importance of face. In text messages and emails emphasize the value of facial expression in our communication, So, this is also a very important indicator. Even very simple animated face with two eyes and lips, people are able to understand diverse emotion through these emojis and so on. Now, if you look at our face, has a lot of muscles that helps us to able to express diverse emotions. So, facial expressions are created by coordinated contraction of muscle groups, which results in the folds and wrinkles in the skins of face. Other skeletal muscles in the body, on the other hand, are connected to bones and can move your skeletons. So, our face has coordinated muscle groups, which folding and wrinkling of those muscle groups creates all kinds of expressions. It is estimated that about 43 muscles are involved in the facial expression of emotions. These muscles also control sensory organs on the face, such as closing and opening of eyes and mouth, and the expressions of emotions by changing shapes and surface of the. So, there are diverse muscle groups, maybe around 43 muscles, different muscle groups in our face, which help us to give diverse expressions. So, our brain receives the feedback from those muscle groups, and brains also understand what is your emotions from those feedback from those muscle groups. Whenever there is a contraction in certain muscle groups, this feedback goes to the brain, and brain understands the message from that. So, it relies on something called as a mechanoreceptors in the skin, which are most sensitive to change in the position, as opposed to proprioceptors in the other muscles, which provide constant information about muscle stretching and contraction as well as joint angle. So, there is facial muscles, the brain gets feedback using something called as a mechanoreceptors and so on. What is fascinating about emotional communication is that it appears as if some of these expression of emotions are biologically hardwired. Automatically the face takes certain expression. It is biologically hardwired. So, therefore, a lot of these emotions like anger, disgust, fear are called as basic emotions, because they are almost hardwired in our system, and it is almost similarly expressed in different cultures. They are almost universal. So, just to give you some examples how facial expression creates different emotions. For example, if you see anger, so these photos are taken from Paul Ekman's website. So, if you see, by looking at a face, we can very clearly understand what kind of emotions the person is expressing. Very specific, muscle group contraction happens when we feel anger. For example, here in anger, eyebrows are pulled down and together. So, these eyebrows are pulled down and together, eyes are opened wide and staring, lips pressed tightly together. These are some of the common muscle groups behavior, and contraction and happens in this very similar fashion. So, people in across different cultures, whenever they express anger, very similar expression happens. So, one can very easily understand that this person is expressing anger through face. It can very clearly communicate the emotions through their face. When we experience fear, also there is a very specific expression. People can easily understand that this person is afraid. For example, in this case, eyebrows are raised and pulled together. So, here it is raised. In case of anger, it was pulled down. Then raised upper eyelids, this one. Tensed lower eyelids, this one. Jaw dropped open and lips stretched horizontally backward. So, these are some of the expressions, and people can very clearly understand what kind of emotions that person is expressing. Another one is happiness. If you see here, it is also very specific configuration of facial muscles. Your eyes are narrowed and there is some wrinkling around the eyes. So, this one, cheeks are raised here, and then lips are pulled back and teeth are exposed in a smile. So, this is a typical expression of happiness or joy through the face and so on. So, this is something about the meaning of, so this is the first lecture of introductory concepts around the concept of emotions. So, we defined the meaning of emotions, the component of emotions, we tried to understand the basic emotional model and dimensional model of the emotions, and we discussed some of the basic ways through which emotions are communicated. So, with this I stop here. Thank you.